All right, so hi everyone, my name is Ariel Marcy, and I am a little bit of an oddball because I am a biologist. I'm a PhD student. I'm here in Australia because you guys have all the awesomely weird mammals. I also have a educational game company called Steam Galaxy Studios, which you can check out at that link below. And today I'll be talking about explicitly a serious game, so it's kind of great that I followed Matthew. But I just want to kind of put it out there that this could be applied to games that just tangentially include science as well. So, like I said, I'm obviously clearly a very serious scientist, and if you want to know what I'm studying with my PhD, ask me why there are no flying kangaroos. I'm also, as part of being a PhD student, you have to teach. So I've been a science teacher in a number of capacities, and I combine these two perspectives with game design, and specifically educational game design. So today I'll be talking about my game Go Extinct, which was successfully funded on Kickstarter in 2014 and is now distributed across the US, and I just signed a deal with Australia, so you may see it coming into stores soon. But what it does is it uses Go Fish-like mechanics, so something very familiar, to teach humans as young as 8 one of the most profound ideas in science. And I'll be talking a lot about that today. You might be able to recognize that as an evolutionary tree, which illustrates how all of the diversity of life that we see on Earth once shared a common ancestor. And it's also fun for adults. These are the awesomely weird mammal curators at the Melbourne Museum playing the game. So, the theme of today's talk is how the creativity of game design is actually very similar to the creativity involved in science. So it makes sense to just make sure we're on the same page. What is science? Science is not just facts. That's kind of like saying art is just pictures. Science is discovering how all of these facts fit together in a system. So science is kind of twofold. It's this body of knowledge that we have and the process by which we discover it. And I think that both of those things require creativity, and I'll explain that even more as we go through. But I think this kind of twofold aspect is similar to the creativity in game design in that it's creative to make a game, but you're also requiring your players to make creative connections in order to play your game. So not just facts, not just a simple scientific method either. So this is, I love this diagram because it is better communicating what the scientific method is actually like than kind of what you learn in your typical textbook. And I think it also looks a lot like the game design process, right? Like rapid prototype iteration, that kind of thing. And I'll just put out there, it's kind of similar to what you're asking your players to do too when you throw them into a system and ask them to master it. So to illustrate how science is creative, I'm going to be focusing on the story of Darwin. And you can see in our progress bar from there, I'll transition into a little bit of Evolution 101, just quick. And then that will seg very nicely into what my game is teaching. I'll talk a little bit about how it's used in the classroom, and then we'll end with some action steps. Game design talk has to have a progress bar, right? Cool. Okay, so let's define our terms. So creativity is the ability to think of new things, make them real. Like that's what we do with games. We have to make a game, get it out there in the world. It doesn't exist until it's shipped, right? And it's kind of similar in science. Like publish or perish is a phrase you might have heard, that science doesn't exist until you can actually publish a paper and show it, and other people can reference it. I like this definition though, because it emphasizes the expressiveness part. So both art and science require interpretation, and that interpretation comes from your perspective and is very much informed by the unique experiences and knowledge and influences that you have. And so this really emphasizes that creativity is very personal. And when we bring that to both art and science, it adds value to it. And then the last definition is the ability to perceive the world in new ways, find hidden patterns, and make connections between things that weren't previously connected. And like that's kind of the definition of science. So I hope I've convinced you that science is creative. And to illustrate this definition of creativity, I'm going to make a connection between the MDA framework and designing a learning game using scientific principles. And this is not the first time the MDA framework has been slightly co-opted. I know there's a lot of software developers in the audience, so this originally comes from looking at how code creates a user experience. So, what is Darwin's creative idea? Darwin's creative idea for natural selection is based on these 4 principles. And the first one is that individuals within a population are variable. And as I go through these 4 principles of natural selection, I'm just going to emphasize how these come from Darwin's unique experience. So, has anyone seen The Wider Earth? It's a play going on at the Queensland Theatre right now. If you haven't, go see it. It's awesome. And they have this joke in there where the actor playing Darwin puts beetles in his mouth because he doesn't have enough hands to collect all the beetles he wants. Darwin actually did that. He was obsessed with beetles, and so this was part of his experience of noticing all this variation. The second tenet that natural selection is based on is that variation is heritable. And I put up this amazing photo of pigeons because it was all the rage in Victorian era to domesticate and breed crazy forms of pigeons. And this is something that Darwin's father did. And later, that's why Darwin spends most of his book, The Origin of Species, talking about artificial selection. So changing animals, humans changing animals as opposed to before getting into how nature actually does it. The third is that there aren't enough resources for all offspring to survive. And this was actually a very popular idea at the time because of this dude, Thomas Malthus. But Darwin's creative connection was applying it from humans and applying it to animals. And then the last tenet is that survival and reproduction are non-random. And this was something that was brought home to him by his fabulous travels in the Galapagos, because he was noticing how on each of those islands, slightly different forms of tortoises existed, and some of them had these raised shells that allowed them to get their heads up towards the plants that existed higher up, whereas on islands that didn't have that, the shells were domed. Notice that I'm not talking about finches, because finches are boring. Okay, so getting back to this MDA framework, in case you'd forgotten it was a game design talk, all of these, I think, are analogous to the mechanics of a game. So, here. So, what happens when we set those mechanics in motion? That's when we start to get this system of natural selection. And yes, I'm using an awkward family photo to illustrate this. That basically all of those tenets add up together to give us some individuals are better in their environment because of a variant that they've inherited. So in this scheme, an adaptation is a heritable trait that's improving their survival and or sexiness. And that evolution, therefore, when you add in that time component, these adaptations persist in populations, and they're going to be different based on where those populations are. So this is the analogous to the the dynamics, setting those mechanics in motion. So, what Darwin's really creative idea, though, was extending that even further, being okay, well, if these turtles, these 2 populations of turtles are related, then what about the turtles on the mainland? And then, well, why stop with turtles? Why not go to all vertebrates? And then it's, turtles all the way down, right? So, thank you. All of life is connected. It's an amazing idea. And it was so different from the idea at the beginning, which was that all of these forms were created unchanging in their place. And so that gives this profound discovery, which I think is analogous to the aesthetics, that all of life shares a common ancestor. And this is something that's also personal, right? Because it creates meaning for you and your place in the world. So, this gives us an evolutionary tree. Oh, and I just wanted to focus on diagram is one of the first evolutionary trees drawn. It's one of the only diagrams in the origin, and it's so popular that biologists like this person tattoo it on their body. So that's how you can spot a biologist. No, it's not, but maybe after I finish my PhD. Okay, so how an evolutionary tree works. So this diagram very, very succinctly summarizes all of those big ideas that we were talking about, because it demonstrates how these different animals are related to each other, sort of like a family tree, with some more related than others and some more distantly related. And you can see that in how distant the connections are. And then it also shows what kind of adaptations, what traits that are shared by these animals. So all of them, in this example, have a vertebra, but only the primates and the rodents have hair, for example. So it tells us a little bit about their particular evolutionary story. And then implicitly, there's this idea of immense amounts of time required for this to happen. So getting back to kind of my two perspectives, as a scientist, this for me is like a Rosetta Stone. And I have this experience of, whenever I go to a conference or whenever I go to a lab presentation, whenever someone is giving a new organism or introducing something new, they always present an evolutionary tree, because it allows us to orient, okay, where is this in relation to things I know about? I can infer things about it now that I know who it's related to. But when I was teaching students, evolutionary trees was one of the hardest topics to teach. And like, how many of you are feeling a little bit of empathy for my students right now? Okay, cool, maybe I did a good job. But that's part of the point, is that I think that this is a concept, because it's nonlinear, is not taught particularly well in a linear format like a stand and deliver talk, and that games do it much better. And so this is where we start going back to the MDA framework, where, okay, like good game designers, let's start with the aesthetics. We want to teach something profound about science. How do we do that? So the way that I did it when I was designing my game Go Extinct was to start with the evolutionary tree, which is this, profound, very visual, succinct way of summarizing this profound scientific idea. And so you'll notice that the tree is also color-coded with, I think I have more pictures of this coming. Yes, so you can see that the animals that are more closely related to each other share the same color. And then animals that are slightly less related have a different shade of that color. And so that's an example of using like the literal aesthetics of the game to start reinforcing this idea of sets within sets, that animals are closely related to each other and less closely related to others, but at some point they all share a common ancestor. I keep saying sets within sets because when you take an evolutionary tree out of the context of science and then apply it to a game system, like that's basically all it is. And that's kind of a brilliant game design system, because when you set it in motion into dynamics, then you get this amazing emergent property of the strategy. And so let me explain that a little bit. So in the game, what you're trying to do is you're trying to collect all of the animals that connect to one of those solid colored circles. So you're trying to get all the animals in those top sets. So when you start, you're gonna be closer to getting some than others. And so you have to ask someone else, do you have any? Much like Go Fish. But instead of just asking for a number, you get to choose what level of specificity on the tree you ask for. So you could ask for the chicken, but that kind of gives away what you already have, and it's less likely that the other player has it. So you could be a little bit sneakier. You could ask for terrible lizards, and then in that case, the other person could give you any one of the dinosaurs that they have. Or say you have the Stegosaurus, and then maybe you also have the crocodile. The best strategy then is to look at, oh, well, they share a common ancestor, the toothy grinners. If I ask for the toothy grinners, they could give me any one of those green cards. I'm more likely to get something that's useful to me, and I give way less information about my hand. And so in that way, the emergent strategy is the learning goal. identifying these common ancestors. So the last point I want to make is that something that's unique about games that is not true of lectures or books is that repetition is fine because it's fun. And repetition means that you build this familiarity with the concept that's taught in the game. So one of the things that also comes out is that players start to notice things like that chickens are dinosaurs. And I love this when it happens because then I get to say, and aren't they delicious? But that sort of connection, players are picking out things that are relevant to them. But the thing about in the case of the king snake, no longer has 4 legs, but is still technically a tetrapod, still technically an animal with 4 legs because it evolved from something that had it. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by science. Okay, so my main point though is that the facts that are relevant are still obviously secondary to the main idea, which is that all of these animals share a common ancestor. And look, now you know how to read an evolutionary tree. I've been using this game in classrooms for several years, and what's most exciting to me is that after a round of playing this game, kids in middle school just like almost immediately get it and understand this idea that, okay, you have a group of related animals and that's a group, but then where does it stop? It's turtles all the way down, like we're all related. And I think something that will resonate, especially with this audience, is that games in the classroom mean it increases the audience of people who might be just naturally excited about what's going on in the classroom, and that the fact that being good at games is now an academic skill that they can bring is something that encourages a lot of kids and reaches out to more people that might be traditionally reached by this stand and deliver method that we use. So we get back to the learning game, meaningfully teaching a scientific principle. The last thing that I want to share about what I've been doing is combining art and science is actually getting kids to design their own science games as part of a longer term project. And of course, we've reached inception levels of using the MDA framework because not only are they thinking about how to bring in the science, but now they're also creatively thinking about, okay, how do we present the science in a way that's interesting in a game design setting as well. And so this is Jane. She's 9 and she loves cats. So we looked up the latest evolutionary tree for cats, and that's her going through deciding which cats would be most interesting to include, and she wrote the flavor text for all the cards, which is just like brilliant. And that's her presenting at the end of her school's session on evolution, and listening to her explain the tree to her mom was just like amazing because she got it, she understood it, she knew what it meant for animals to be further connected, that they had split more distantly in the past than the animals that were closer together. Like she just understood what it meant. So I just want to make a serious point here, and that another thing that game design and science unfortunately have in common is a diversity issue. And I just want to highlight and say explicitly why diversity matters, because we often talk about, okay, we need more diversity in X, but why? And I think it comes back to this idea of creativity, and that creativity is characterized by originality and expressiveness, which comes from our unique experiences. And so we're going to get the best games and we're going to get the best science when we have the most diverse groups of people coming together to make connections between things that were not connected before. So on that note, that's kind of the driving principle behind what I do with STEAM Galaxy. And that's why I emphasize the critical role of creativity in STEAM and science with my games, and I think games do a really good job of doing that. And just to summarize, science is, like game design, very much based on systems, and because of that, I think they make an excellent source for games, not just serious games. And I love that I'm coming after Ben's talk as well, because I think it relates to, if you can think about how science fits in, like aesthetics at the very beginning of level design, you can make these very profound experiences, because both science and art help us understand how we fit in the world and how we make meaning. Games that are explicitly built on science teach it organically, which is awesome. And then when you get kids designing science, yay, you teach everything. So, future game designers of the world, right? From here, I'd just like to encourage you to learn more about science and scientists if you feel like you don't know a lot. These are a few great places to start. Like, I can't recommend that website enough at the top. Don't be fooled by its very humble Web 0.0 aesthetic. The content is amazing. Twitter is a great place, and do reach out to scientists, because we have weird stories to tell that you may not have heard about. Ask me about those things after. I'd love to tell you. Also, be an advocate for diversity, because of this, unique experiences promoting creativity. One of the ways is to be a mentor, and I just want to point out that Darwin almost didn't get to go on the Beagle, because his father didn't want him to go. He was like, no, you need to go be a priest. And it was his mentors who saw his potential, writing letters to Darwin's father, that actually got him to go. And if you would like, you can check out my website here. So thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions.
Quick questions. That was a bit over 2 minutes. We didn't want to interrupt the progress bar. So, yes, any quick questions, Ariel?
Talk to me after.
Good.
Cool.